He thought he was just dealing with another street punk until the badge he mocked flipped out to reveal 3 bold letters. F.B.I. It was a scorching Thursday afternoon in downtown Chicago, the kind of day where the pavement sizzled under your shoes and the air felt like a heavy blanket. Officer Mark Daniels wiped the sweat from his brow as he leaned against the side of his patrol car, sipping the last of his lukewarm coffee. He had been on the force for over 15 years, and this neighborhood had become familiar territory to him. Too familiar, in fact. Over the years, his instincts had hardened. He believed he could spot trouble from a mile away, and he didn't think twice before acting on it. That's why, when he saw a man standing alone near a light pole across the street, glancing around, and speaking quietly into his phone, a red flag immediately went up in his mind. The man's clothes were scruffy, a gray hoodie with a small rip in the sleeve, faded jeans, and old sneakers. He had a small backpack slung over one shoulder, and wore dark sunglasses, even though the nearest shade was a block away. Everything about him screamed suspicious to Daniels. He didn't know who the guy was, but he didn't like him. Without calling it in or taking a moment to observe further, Daniels marched across the street. His hand instinctively touched the baton strapped to his side, not because he planned to use it, but because it gave him a feeling of authority. He had no idea that every step he took was walking him closer to the biggest mistake of his career. As he neared the man, Daniels barked, "Hey, you, what are you doing here?" The man didn't seem startled. He finished his sentence on the phone and looked up calmly. "Just making a call," he said. His voice was steady, controlled, almost a calm. That only irritated Daniels more. "Making a call," Daniels scoffed. "You look like you're casing the place. Let me see some ID now." The man didn't move quickly, and that hesitation only fueled Daniels' assumptions. "I said now," he snapped. "You think I won't cuff you right here?" People nearby began to glance over. Daniels noticed but didn't care. He was used to the attention. He always said he had nothing to hide. The man finally reached into his jacket, but instead of pulling out a wallet, he revealed a small black badge case. He flipped it open with one hand, keeping the other visible. Inside was a shiny badge and a card that read, "Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Agent David Ramirez." Daniels' jaw locked. For a second he thought it was a joke, maybe a fake, maybe some wannabe trying to play tough. But Agent Ramirez saw the doubt in his eyes and said clearly, "I'm working an active undercover operation. You just blew 3 months of work." The words landed like a punch to the stomach. Daniels took a step back, his face flushing with confusion, then embarrassment, and then anger. "Why didn't you say anything?" he snapped. "Why didn't you identify yourself when I asked?" Agent Ramirez didn't flinch. "Because I wasn't doing anything wrong. You came at me like I was a threat before you even asked a single question. That's not how this job is supposed to work." More people were watching now. A woman across the street had pulled out her phone and was recording. Daniels suddenly felt exposed in a way he never had before. "You were acting suspicious," he muttered defensively. "You were standing around, looking nervous." Ramirez shook his head slowly, a hint of disbelief in his expression. "Suspicious to you because of what?" "My hoodie, my skin color, the fact that I wasn't smiling." His voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it now. "This is exactly the kind of behavior we're trying to stop, officer. You didn't investigate. You assumed, and now the operation I've been running for months is compromised. The guy we've been tracking is probably halfway to another state by now, thanks to your performance." Daniels felt heat rising in his ears. He opened his mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come. He couldn't explain why he'd jumped to conclusions. The truth was, he had made assumptions, ones he didn't even question anymore. Over the years, Daniels had stopped asking questions and started relying on what he thought was instinct. But in reality, it was bias, unchecked and wrapped in a badge. And now, standing in front of a federal agent with a real mission, Daniels felt something unfamiliar. Shame. The worst part was that the FBI agent wasn't yelling, wasn't making a scene. He was just telling the truth, and doing it in front of a growing crowd. Ramirez finally said, "You want to make it right. Start by remembering that the people you see on the street aren't always who you think they are. Some of us are working to protect the city too, just not in a uniform." Then, without waiting for a response, he walked away, pulled out his phone again, and disappeared into the crowd. Daniels stood there, frozen, unsure whether to call his supervisor or just sink into the pavement. The bystanders slowly went back to their day, but a few of them were still filming. His name would probably be trending by nightfall. For the first time in years, Officer Daniels didn't feel like the one in control. He turned and walked back to his car, hands slightly shaking, heart pounding with regret and anxiety. Inside, the air felt too hot. He sat in silence, staring out the windshield, playing the moment over and over in his mind. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a wake-up call, and something deep inside him knew that the consequences hadn't even started yet. Officer Daniels barely slept that night. He kept thinking about what had happened on the street, the look on Agent Ramirez's face, the quiet disappointment, the words that still rang in his ears. He had made a fool of himself in front of a federal agent and a bunch of strangers. Worse, he had blown an undercover operation. something he never thought he'd be responsible for. When he finally drifted off around dawn, he dreamed of sirens, flashing lights, and people pointing at him. By the time his alarm went off, the pit in his stomach had only grown deeper. He dragged himself out of bed, put on his uniform, and drove to the station, his thoughts racing. Maybe no one had said anything yet. Maybe Ramirez had decided not to report it, but that hope vanished the moment he walked through the doors. The moment Daniels entered the precinct, the mood shifted. A few officers gave him looks, others avoided eye contact. It didn't take long before his captain called him into the office. Captain Lewis was a no-nonsense woman with 25 years on the force and a reputation for doing things by the book. She didn't waste time. "Close the door," she said sharply, not even looking up from the file on her desk. Daniels obeyed. As soon as the door clicked shut, she looked at him, and he saw it. The disappointment, the frustration, and something else, not anger, something colder. "You ran into a federal agent yesterday," she said, flipping a page. "Special Agent David Ramirez, FBI. You interrupted a long-term undercover operation and caused the suspect to flee. Is all of that true?" Daniels shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Captain, I didn't know who he was. He looked suspicious." She raised a hand. "I didn't ask for excuses." Daniels, "I'd asked if it's true." He nodded, defeated. "Yes, ma'am, it's true." She closed the file with a loud thump and leaned forward. "You've been on the force a long time, Mark. You've made arrests, done your duty, put in the hours. But somewhere along the way, you stopped thinking. You started acting like a street judge instead of a police officer. And now this isn't just a mistake. This is a mess. The FBI has already filed a complaint." Ramirez didn't hold back. He said you harassed him, didn't ask questions, escalated for no reason, and compromised. "A federal case. We've also got video. It's online, 2 different angles. You're on TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook. You're trending for the wrong reasons." Her voice wasn't raised, but every word felt heavier than the last. Daniels sat still, swallowing. Hard, he felt like he was shrinking in his chair. "So what happens now?" he asked quietly. Captain Lewis leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "You're lucky the FBI isn't pressing formal charges. But this isn't going away. Internal Affairs will review your conduct. You're being pulled from patrol duty effective immediately. You'll attend mandatory de-escalation and racial bias training. Suspension is still on the table, depending on the investigation." She paused, then added, "I don't want to fire you, Mark, but I can't protect you from the consequences of your actions. Not this time." The ride home that day felt 10 times longer than usual. Daniels kept thinking about what he would say to his wife, to his kids, to the people he had worked with for years. He had always seen himself as a good cop, not perfect, but honest, loyal, dependable. But now, he was the one under the microscope. And for the first time he began to question how many other moments in his career had been just like that one. Moments when he had jumped to conclusions, barked at someone who didn't deserve it, or dismissed someone just because they looked wrong. He had always brushed those off as part of the job, but now, he couldn't brush this one off. Later that evening after dinner, Daniels sat alone on his porch with a glass of water and stared out into the quiet street. He could hear a few kids playing down the block, a dog barking in the distance, and the occasional car rolling by. The same neighborhood he'd sworn to protect now felt different. He felt watched, even though no one was around. He replayed his talk with Captain Lewis again and again in his head. He felt anger at Ramirez, at the FBI, at the people who recorded him, but deeper down, he felt something else. Guilt, because no matter how many excuses he tried to make in his mind, the truth was clear. He had messed up badly. That next morning, Daniels received an official notice to report to a department workshop, a week-long course on racial bias and communication. It was mandatory, no exceptions. He didn't protest. He packed a notebook, wore plain clothes, and showed up on time. He walked into a room full of other officers, a few of whom recognized him immediately. The room went silent for a moment, then turned back to casual conversation. The instructor, a former cop turned educator named Jordan Ellis, welcomed everyone and began the session. "We're not here to point fingers," Ellis said. "We're here to hold a mirror. And what you see in that mirror, that's on you." The training sessions were tough. Not because they were aggressive or confrontational, but because they made Daniels think. He listened to stories from people of color who described being stopped, searched, questioned, and even arrested for things as simple as walking down the street or talking on the phone, just like Ramirez had been. The stories sounded familiar, too familiar. For the first time, Daniels sat in silence and listened, not as an officer trying to defend himself, but as a man trying to understand where he had gone wrong. By the end of the week, something had started to shift. He hadn't changed completely, not yet, but he had begun to realize that the badge didn't make him right. His actions did, and his actions had failed someone who was actually on the same team. As he walked out of the final session on Friday afternoon, Jordan Ellis pulled him aside. "Tough week?" Ellis asked. Daniels nodded. "Yeah," he said, quietly. "Real tough." Ellis gave him a firm nod. "Good, that means you were listening." Daniels drove home that night without the radio on, without any distractions, just silence. A heavy silence. one that meant something was finally sinking in. The fallout had begun, but maybe, just maybe, so had the change. 3 weeks had passed since Officer Daniels' life turned upside down, and while the noise on social media had started to fade, the echo of that one mistake still rang loudly in his head. The training course was over, but the lessons stayed with him, and they didn't disappear just because he was off duty. He hadn't returned to patrol yet. Internal Affairs was still reviewing the incident, and he was officially assigned to desk duty, going through reports, filing paperwork, and answering phones. It was humiliating, especially for someone who had once been proud of being on the front line. He tried not to think about what his co-workers thought of him now, but the looks in the hallway and the quiet whispers were hard to ignore. Some officers thought he got what he deserved. Others quietly sympathized but kept their distance. Daniels didn't blame any of them. He wasn't even sure how he felt about himself anymore. Then, on a cool Tuesday morning, something unexpected happened. His captain called him into her office again. Daniels walked in, nervous, wondering if this would be the conversation where she told him the department had decided to let him go. But instead, Captain Lewis looked calm, almost thoughtful. "Mark, I just got off the phone with Agent Ramirez. She said he asked to meet with you in person." Daniels blinked, surprised. "He what? Why?" She shrugged. "He didn't say exactly, just that it's important. I think you should go." Daniels hesitated, unsure. After everything, he didn't expect Ramirez to ever want to see him again, much less talk, but something in him said yes before he could overthink it. "Okay, I'll do it." They met that afternoon in a quiet corner of a federal building downtown. Daniels arrived early and sat in the waiting area, tapping his foot nervously when Ramirez finally entered the room, dressed in a suit and holding a file folder. He looked exactly the same, calm, focused, unreadable. Daniels stood awkwardly. "Agent Ramirez," he said. "Thanks for agreeing to meet." Ramirez nodded and motioned for him to sit. "I didn't come to fight with you," Ramirez said right away. "I'm not here to file more reports or drag this out. What's done is done. I asked to meet because I believe something good can still come from this." Daniels was caught off guard. He had expected anger, or at least cold professionalism. But Ramirez's tone was steady, even generous. "I've seen a lot of bad cops," Ramirez continued. "The kind who don't care, who don't listen, who double down even when they're wrong. You didn't do that. You made a mistake. Yeah, a serious one, but you owned it. You took the training. You showed up when others would have walked away. That means something to me." Daniels listened closely, not quite sure what to say. A part of him still carried shame, but Ramirez's words chipped away at it. "I wanted to offer something," Ramirez said, sliding the folder across the table. "There's a community outreach program we're working on, joint effort between local law enforcement and federal agents. It's focused on rebuilding trust between the police and the communities we serve. It's small now, but growing. We need officers who are willing to speak honestly, who've been through it, who know what needs to change." Daniels looked down at the folder, then back at Ramirez. "You want me to be part of this?" Ramirez nodded. "If you're ready, not just for the program, but to keep learning, keep changing. This isn't about cleaning up your image. It's about helping fix something bigger than either of us." Daniel sat with that for a long moment. He thought about all the people who had crossed the street when they saw him coming. All the times he had been so sure he was right and never stopped to question it. Maybe this was the reason things had happened the way they did. Maybe this was the beginning of something better. He slowly nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I want to help. I want to make it right." Ramirez leaned back and let out a slow breath, like he'd been waiting for that answer. "Good," he said. "We'll start next week. You'll be working alongside me. It won't be easy. Some of the people we talk to, they don't trust cops, and they have every reason not to. But if they see that some of us are willing to listen, really listen, maybe that can start to change." Over the next several days, Daniels prepared for this new role. He read through the materials Ramirez gave him, attended planning sessions, and began writing down his own thoughts, things he'd never shared out loud before. He thought about the first time he pulled someone over because of a gut feeling and didn't even realize it was bias. He thought about the young kid he shouted at for loitering near a corner store, who probably still remembered that moment. All the little things that added up over the years. Now, he was going to have to face those stories in reverse, listening to others share their pain, their fear, their anger. It wouldn't be comfortable, but he knew it was necessary. The first community session took place at a church basement on the south side. Daniels showed up early, wearing civilian clothes, no uniform, no badge on display. He didn't want to send the wrong message. Ramirez introduced him to the small group local residents, activists, faith leaders, and a few other officers who had joined the effort. When it was Daniels' turn to speak, he stood up slowly. The room was quiet. Everyone watched him with cautious eyes. He cleared his throat. "I'm Officer Mark Daniels," he began. "I've been with the department for 15 years, and I'm here because I got it wrong." The room didn't react. He kept going. 3 weeks ago, I approached a man I thought was suspicious. I didn't ask questions. I didn't stay calm, I just acted. That man turned out to be Agent Ramirez, who's sitting right there. I ruined his investigation. I embarrassed myself, my department, and I made a lot of people feel like nothing's ever going to change." He paused, then added, "But I'm here because I want things to change, and I know it starts with me." For the first time, the room softened. People began to nod slowly, not with full trust, not yet, but with cautious curiosity. They were willing to listen, and that was all he needed for now. As the meeting went on, people spoke openly, some angrily, some tearfully. Daniels listened. He took notes. He asked questions, not like a cop, but like a man trying to understand. And as he left the church that night, something inside him felt lighter. Not because he had fixed anything, but because, for the first time, he was truly trying. Months passed, and slowly, the weight of Officer Daniels' mistake began to shift. It didn't disappear, not completely, but it stopped defining him. He continued working side by side with Agent Ramirez in the community outreach program, showing up at schools, churches, town halls, and even open forums where angry voices challenged him face to face. People remembered him, of course. Some still whispered, "That's the cop from the video." But what surprised him was that after hearing him speak, after seeing him stay in those rooms and not run from the hard questions, many of those same people started to see him differently. Not as a perfect officer, but as a man who had changed, a man trying to be better than he was. Daniels didn't pretend he had all the answers. He didn't act like one apology could erase years of mistakes, but he made it clear he wasn't there to defend the past. He was there to help shape the future. One night, during a particularly heated forum in a local rec center, a teenage boy stood up, shaking with emotion. "Why should we believe you?" he asked, eyes locked on Daniels. "You messed up, you got caught. Now you show up and talk." But that doesn't undo the fear we feel every time we see a cop car drive by. It doesn't bring back the people we lost. The room went quiet. Daniels could feel everyone holding their breath. He stepped forward slowly. "You're right," he said. I can't undo what I did or what others have done, but I can show up again and again and keep listening. I can use my position to call out the bad behavior I used to ignore. I can train new officers differently. I can stay in these rooms even when it's uncomfortable. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to do the work." The boy didn't respond, but he sat back down. His face was still tense, but his eyes no longer burned with the same anger. Sometimes, Daniels had learned, change didn't come from words, it came from presence. From not leaving when it got hard. By spring, Daniels had returned to patrol duty, but it wasn't the same as before. He walked neighborhoods now, not just drove through them. He talked to shop owners, shook hands with kids, and checked in on elders sitting on their porches. He didn't see his badge as a shield anymore. He saw it as a responsibility. Ramirez remained close, mentoring him in quiet, steady ways. The two had gone from unlikely acquaintances to something like friends. They didn't talk about that day on the street much anymore, but it was always there, a silent thread between them. One day, as they walked out of a middle school event together, Ramirez stopped and said, "You've come a long way, Daniels." Daniels looked over, half smiling. "Still a long way to go." Ramirez nodded. "That's the point. You're not pretending it's done. You're still walking." The department noticed the changes to Daniels was asked to help revise the training protocols for new recruits. He brought real-world scenarios into the sessions, not just textbook drills, but moments where ego, fear, and split-second judgment could go wrong. He told his story openly, not to shame himself but to show what could happen if officers stopped listening, stopped thinking, and started assuming. Some rookies were shocked by his honesty. Others looked at him with a kind of respect they didn't give higher-ups. He wasn't perfect, but he was real. One evening, nearly a year after it all began, Daniels found himself back at the same street corner where he had first confronted Ramirez. The sky was the same shade of golden orange it had been that day. The same light pole stood in place. The memory came rushing back, his voice too loud, his posture too aggressive. The blind confidence that had almost ruined a man's work and reputation. He stood there for a long time watching people pass by. No one gave him a second glance. Now, but in his mind it was like the whole thing was happening again. Only this time he imagined it differently. He imagined himself walking up slowly, calmly asking questions, checking first, listening second. He imagined a version of himself that didn't exist back then but did now. As he turned to leave, a young woman nearby said, "You that cop from the video?" Daniels looked at her, surprised. She didn't sound angry, just curious. "Yeah," he said honestly, "that's me." She nodded slowly. "I saw it when it happened. I remember being mad, but I've also seen what you've been doing. Since heard you at the community meeting last month. My cousin was there, said you stayed the whole time." Daniels gave a small nod. "Trying to keep showing up," he said. She looked at him for a moment longer, then said, "Keep doing it. People notice more than you think." Then she walked off. He stood there for a while longer, the evening breeze brushing against his face, and for the first time in a long time, he felt peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because something had shifted in him, in others, maybe even in the system. It was slow work, it was hard work, but it was real, and it was worth doing. That night, as he sat on his porch with a notebook in hand, he wrote a single line across the top of the page. Redemption doesn't come in a moment. It comes in what you do after. He underlined it, closed the notebook, and leaned back, eyes on the quiet street ahead. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed faintly, fading into the night. Daniels took a deep breath and whispered to himself, "I'm still here." And this time he meant it differently, not as a man with authority, but as a man with purpose. The journey that began with a mistake had ended with a mission, and that was only the beginning. If you felt the power of this story, don't forget to like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to The Black Struggle for more eye-opening stories that speak truth to power.